They called him an outcast until he died protecting their town. Gift, cité. Before we get into this story, I've got a gift for you. I've written an exclusive Wild West tale you won't find on YouTube, and it's completely free. Just check the link in the description or the pinned comment to grab your copy. Now saddle up and let's ride straight into today's story. Beginning cité. Before we dive in, pause for a moment and tell me something. Where in the world are you watching from, and what time is it right now? Maybe it's sunrise in Nairobi, midnight in New York, afternoon in Canada, or evening in France. Don't just watch quietly. Drop a comment below and let's see how far this story reaches across the world. Now lean in and let's begin. The night was bitter, and the wind carried the sound of horses' hooves fading into the dark. In the empty canyon, a man lay half-slumped against a boulder, his shirt torn open, his ribs showing beneath blood and dust. His name was Elias Duval, though the town called him nothing more than the drifter, the one they didn't trust. Just hours before, he had been forced out of that very town, spit at, cursed at, told never to come back. Now, with 2 bullets lodged in his side and the cold creeping into his bones, he wondered if they would even remember him after the buzzards picked him clean. Somewhere in the shadows, a small voice whispered, "Mister, are you going to die?" A boy had crept from the rocks, barefoot, clutching a ragged doll his sister had lost. His face was gone from hunger, his lips cracked from thirst. Elias tried to smile, but the blood in his throat made it bitter. "Not tonight, son," he croaked, though even he didn't believe it. The boy's eyes were wide, trembling in the moonlight. "My sister," she said, "if nobody saves us, we'll be gone by morning." He clung to Elias's arm, as though the broken stranger could hold back death itself. Elias looked at him, a helpless child abandoned in a merciless desert, and felt something stir inside him that hadn't lived in years. Something more than pain, more than shame. But before Elias could speak again, a sharp whistle cut through the canyon. Bandits! The same men who had shot him. Their voices echoed cruelly, laughing in the night. The outcast still breathing? Let's finish the job. The boy froze, tears streaming down his dirt-streaked cheeks. Elias grit his teeth, pushed the child behind him, and reached for the revolver he could barely lift. The moon shone silver on his face as he whispered, "Not tonight." And with that, Elias Duval, the man the town had cast away, prepared to make his last stand. 2 weeks earlier, Elias had walked into the dusty streets of Saint-Rivière with nothing but his horse and a worn satchel. The townsfolk had seen his scarred face, the burn that ran across his jaw, and the stranger's silence unsettled them. In a place where gossip spread faster than prairie fire, rumors took root. He was an outlaw, a deserter, maybe even a killer. No one asked for truth, because truth was slower than suspicion. At the saloon, Elias sat alone. He nursed a glass of water, while laughter roared around him. A group of ranch hands mocked him openly. Look at him, ain't even got the guts to drink like a man. Their jeers were loud enough to rattle the piano player into silence. Elias ignored them, but humiliation clung to him like smoke. When he finally rose to leave, someone spat at his boots. The message was clear. He didn't belong. Later that night, Elias found himself wandering the outskirts. There, under the glow of lantern light, he saw a widow kneeling beside her wagon, struggling to repair a broken wheel while her children cried of hunger. He offered a quiet hand, fixing the wheel with patience, but she shrank back as though his touch carried plague. "Thank you, but please, don't come near," she whispered. He left in silence, but the sting was sharper than any wound. By the next morning, whispers spread through Saint-Rivière. Children were told not to look him in the eye. Men crossed the street to avoid him. Women pulled their curtains when he passed. He wasn't Elias Duval. He wasn't a man. He was the outcast. And yet, somewhere in that rejection, he began to notice the cracks in the town's safety, the lurking presence of riders watching from the hills, men with hunger in their eyes. No one else seemed to see it. No one else wanted to. The warning came not from the sheriff, but from a little girl no older than 7. She tugged Elias's coat as he walked past the schoolhouse. "Mister, my mama says bad men are coming," she whispered, eyes wide with fear. Her words struck him harder than a bullet. A child should never carry the weight of dread. Yet she did, because the grown men of Saint-Rivière refused to face what was coming. That evening, Elias rode out beyond the town limits. From the ridge, he saw them, riders in the distance, circling like wolves, their campfires glowing under the stars. He counted at least 20. Bandits, raiders, men who would strip Saint-Rivière bare and leave nothing but ashes. His gut twisted. He could ride on, leave the town to its fate. They had given him nothing but scorn. But when he thought of the widow, of the little boy clutching the ragged doll, of the girl whispering her fears, he knew he couldn't turn away. Back in town, he tried to speak. At the saloon, he stood before the sheriff, a man named Baudin whose belly stretched against his vest. "They're coming," Elias warned. "You've got days, maybe less." But Baudin only sneered. "And why should we believe a drifter like you? You're just trying to scare folks. We don't need your kind." The room erupted in laughter. Humiliated, Elias turned for the door. But as he left, he heard one man mutter, "Even if it's true, better him dead than U.S." The words lodged in Elias's chest like another bullet. That night he prayed, not for himself, but for the town that hated him, for the children who had no voice, for the lives that would soon hang in the balance. Days passed, and the bandits grew bolder. Smoke from their fires was visible even in daylight. The people of Saint-Rivière whispered but refused to act. Then one night, as Elias sat by the river mending his saddle, he heard soft footsteps behind him. It was a widow, Jean Mireille, holding her youngest child in her arms. Her voice trembled. "I know what you saw. They'll come soon. My children, they won't survive it." Her eyes, once filled with fear of him, now brimmed with desperation. She lowered her gaze. "They won't listen to me, but maybe they'll listen if you stand when the time comes." Elias studied her, the lines of exhaustion on her face, the way she clutched her child as if she could shield him from the world. He had no reason to help her, no reason but the one that stirred in his chest, the reason he had buried for years. He could not walk away from the helpless. He nodded once. "When they come, I'll stand." Tears welled in Jean's eyes, but she only whispered, "They'll call you a fool. They'll call you worse. But maybe one day they'll remember you for what you did." She turned and disappeared into the night, her footsteps swallowed by the river's current. Elias sat alone, the weight of her plea pressing heavier than his wounds ever could. For the first time in years, he felt the stirrings of destiny. The next morning, the town square buzzed with fear. News had spread that riders had been seen closer than ever. But instead of preparing, the people lashed out at the one man who had spoken the truth. Elias stood before them, silent as the sheriff accused him of stirring panic. "You brought nothing but bad luck since you rode in," Baudin declared. "Saint-Rivière doesn't need outcasts. We need order." Voices rose in agreement. Men shouted for him to leave. Women pulled their children close, and someone threw a stone that struck Elias across the temple. Blood streamed down his face, but he didn't flinch. He simply stared at them, at the very people he would bleed for, and understood that no proof, no warning, would ever buy him a place among them. The sheriff's voice thundered. "By the law of this town, you are banished. Leave and never return." Elias mounted his horse, the world spinning through the haze of blood. As he rode out, he glanced back only once. Children peered from behind fences, wide-eyed, not understanding the cruelty of their elders. His chest ached, not from the wound, but from the weight of their innocence. Out in the desert, as the sun fell and shadows stretched long, Elias whispered to himself, "If this is a road they've chosen for me, then so be it." He didn't know it yet, but fate would drag him back into Saint-Rivière sooner than he dreamed. When the flames of violence finally consumed the town. Perfect. Let's ride straight into the next act of the story. Below are chapters 6 to 10, continuing from where we left off. Each chapter stays true to the cinematic, emotional, cliffhanger-driven style. Elias rode farther into the desert, nursing his wound and cursing the town's blindness. Each night, he lit no fire, ate little, and listened to the distant laughter of men who hunted with no mercy. The bandits were moving closer. He could hear their gunfire echo across the plains, practice shots that promised bloodshed. One night, as he watered his horse at a half-dry creek, he caught sight of riders less than a mile away. Torches bobbed to the darkness, and their leader's voice rang sharp. "When Saint-Rivière sleeps, we'll gut it clean." Elias clenched his jaw, knowing the town had cast him out, yet his heart refused to let go. They would never be ready without warning. By dawn, he returned to the edge of Saint-Rivière. He didn't dare ride in, not with Baudin's decree, but he saw the widow Jean hanging laundry. Their eyes met across the distance. Her lips trembled with unspoken words. She knew he had come back. She knew he hadn't abandoned them. Suddenly, a shot cracked the morning air. A bullet tore into the dirt near Elias's boots. Bandits had already reached the outskirts. He fired back with what strength he had left, sending 2 riders scattering into the brush. But when the smoke cleared, the town saw only Elias with gun in hand. "Look!" a man shouted. "He's brought the fight here." The blame fell on him again, though the true wolves circled just beyond. That night, Elias hid among the rocks, too weak to ride further. He pressed cloth against his reopened wound and fought for every breath. Just when he thought death would take him, soft footsteps approached. Jean emerged, carrying a lantern shielded in her shawl. "You'll die out here," she whispered, kneeling at his side. She pulled herbs from a pouch, crushed them, and pressed them into his wound. The sting nearly made him pass out, but her steady hands kept him tethered. "They won't listen to you. They'll never admit the danger until it's too late. But you've seen it." Elias tried to push her away, but she stayed. Her eyes burned with quiet strength. "You don't owe us anything. Not after what they did. But if you walk away, they'll butcher every child in Saint-Rivière. And I can't let my children die like that." He swallowed hard, the bitterness of rejection mixing with a new fire in his chest. He had been called outcast, cursed as a burden. But here in her plea, he found a reason worth bleeding for. Before she left, Jean pressed her son's ragged doll into his hand. "If you stand for us, you won't stand alone." Elias clenched the doll in his fist, knowing he could not turn back now. By the next day, Sheriff Baudin had no choice but to admit trouble was near. Smoke from burning homesteads rose on the horizon, and panicked farmers fled to town. Yet even as fear spread, Baudin's pride held stronger than reason. When Elias appeared at the edge of the square, the sheriff's hand went to his gun. "You've got no place here," Baudin growled. Elias's voice was steady. "You'll need every man if you want Saint-Rivière to live." The crowd murmured, torn between fear and hate. Then Baudin smirked cruelly. "Fine. You want to fight for a town that spits on you? Then prove yourself. Ride out tonight, draw the bandits off, and maybe, just maybe, we'll let you back." Gasps rose. It was a death sentence, and everyone knew it. Elias stared into Baudin's smug eyes and saw the coward scheme. But then he heard the cry of a baby from the crowd, saw Jean clutching her children, and something in him hardened. "I'll ride," Elias said. The crowd fell silent, stunned at his acceptance. Baudin grinned, thinking he had sealed the drifter's fate. But in truth, he had just given Elias the fire to write his destiny. Night fell heavy, cloaking the plains in silence. Elias rode out alone, the ragged doll tucked into his coat as if it were armor. He carried little ammunition and less hope, but his heart beat with defiance. He would not let Saint-Rivière fall, not without a fight. When the riders came, they came like a storm, torches flaring, guns flashing. Elias fired into dark, dropping one, then another. For every bandit that fell, 2 more rose. Bullets tore past his shoulders, grazed his arms, split the brim of his hat. Still he fought, using every trick the frontier had taught him, ducking into gullies, drawing them out, vanishing into the night. But the numbers overwhelmed him. A bullet ripped into his side, and he tumbled from his horse into the dust. The bandits' laughter thundered. "Outcast done for," one roared. They surrounded him, pistols gleaming in the firelight. Elias staggered to his knees, revolver shaking in his bloody hand. He thought of the widow's children. He thought of the little girl whispering her fear. He thought of a town that despised him, yet needed him more than they knew. "Come on then," he rasped. "I'll take as many of you with me as I can." And as the leader raised his gun to finish him, a distant cry split the night. "Pa! Don't let him die." The bandits froze, startled. From the rocks, a boy stumbled out. Gene's son, clutching his ragged doll. His face was streaked with tears, but his voice rang with desperate courage. "Leave him alone. He's the only one who'll save us." Elias's heart twisted. He had seen war, betrayal, cruelty, but nothing struck deeper than a child's faith in him. The very man branded worthless. The bandits roared with laughter, mocking the boy. "Look at that. The outcast got a little guardian angel." The leader snarled, shoving the child aside. "This ain't your fight, brat." He cocked his revolver and aimed it square at Elias's chest. The world slowed, every sound vanishing except the boy's broken sobs. Summoning the last of his strength, Elias surged forward. He grabbed the leader's arm, the shot going wide, and wrestled the pistol from his grip. Pain seared through his body as fists and boots rained down on him, but he didn't let go. The boy screamed. The bandits cursed. Blood poured from Elias's wounds, but his spirit refused to bow. With one final roar, he fired into the night, and the leader crumpled in the dust. The plains fell silent. For one fleeting moment, hope flickered in the boy's eyes. But then, as the torches flared again, the bandits tightened their circle. Elias had bought Saint-Rivière time, but the price was far from paid. Got it. Here comes the heart of the escalation. These chapters push Elias and Saint-Rivière into deeper peril, weaving in betrayal, fragile hope, and emotional gut punches. Elias staggered back into Saint-Rivière before dawn, half carried by the boy who had followed him into hell. His shirt was soaked with blood, his steps uneven, but his spirit blazed like wildfire. Townsfolk rushed to the windows as they saw him stumble into the square, dragging the bandit leader's revolver as proof. But instead of cheers, silence met him. Whispers filled the air. "He brought them here," one woman hissed. "He'll doom us all." Sheriff Baudin stepped forward, puffing his chest with false authority. "See? He's half dead. If the outcast can't hold them off, what chance do we have?" Elias dropped the revolver into the dirt, his eyes burning. "They're coming in numbers you can't imagine. You've got one choice, stand together or burn together." His words rang like iron, but the people turned their faces away. Fear was stronger than reason. The widow Jean broke the silence. She stepped forward, clutching her child, and knelt beside Elias. "He saved us once. He'll save us again." Her voice cracked, but her courage held. A few women nodded, tears in their eyes. But Baudin sneered, masking his fear with cruelty. "If he's our only hope, then we're already dead." His words planted doubt like poison in every heart. Elias closed his eyes, realizing he wasn't just fighting bandits. He was fighting the very fear that chained the town to its doom. By midday, the town's leaders gathered in the saloon. Elias, still weak, leaned against the doorframe to hear their verdict. "We don't need to fight," Baudin declared. "We'll strike a bargain. Give the bandits supplies, maybe even a few of the weak ones they don't want, and they'll leave the rest of us alone." The word sent a chill down Elias's spine. Sacrifice the poor to save the strong. That was Baudin's justice. "You'd sell your own people?" Elias growled, staggering into the room. "You'd hand over children?" The sheriff's hand went to his revolver. Better a few brats than the whole town. The saloon erupted in argument. Some men nodded in grim agreement. Others shouted in horror. In the chaos, Elias locked eyes with Jean, who stood at the back. Her face was pale, but her gaze was steady, begging him to speak. Elias's voice cut through the clamor like thunder. "I've seen towns try your way. You pay once, you pay forever. There's only one way to face wolves, you fight." But Baudin smirked. "You're no savior, drifter. You're a curse." And before the crowd, he struck Elias across the face, sending him sprawling to the floor. Humiliation burned deeper than his wound. And worse, Elias realized Baudin wasn't just a coward. He was willing to damn Saint-Rivière with his own hands. That night, while the town argued itself into paralysis, Jean crept to Elias's side. He sat outside the church, staring into the dark, his cheek bruised and his body failing. She carried bread wrapped in cloth and pressed it into his hand. "You can't keep fighting alone," she whispered. Tears glistened in her eyes. "There's something you should know." Elias looked at her warily, but she continued. "My husband, he was sheriff before Baudin. A good man. He tried to stand against the bandits years ago. They ambushed him, left his body in the river. Baudin took his badge that very night, and has lived fat on fear ever since." The truth struck Elias like lightning. Baudin hadn't just failed the town. He had built his power on cowardice. Jean's hand shook as she pressed something into Elias's palm. It was her late husband's badge, tarnished but gleaming faintly in the lantern light. "Saint-Rivière needs a sheriff," she said. "Not the one they chose, but the one willing to bleed for them." Elias stared at the badge, the weight of its meaning pressing heavy on his chest. He was still an outcast, still despised. But in Jean's eyes, for the first time, he saw the man he might become. The next evening, the bandits sent their warning. Flames lit the horizon as 2 ranches burned to ground. Families staggered into Saint-Rivière with nothing but the clothes on their backs, weeping as smoke choked the skies. Panic seized the town. People screamed, packed wagons, and begged the sheriff to act. But Baudin froze, his face pale as parchment. "We'll parley," he stammered. We'll give them what they want." Elias stepped into the square, Jean at his side, the badge glinting faintly on his chest. "You parley, you die on your knees. You fight, you may yet live." His voice carried over chaos. "I won't force you, but I'll stand, even if I stand alone." Children clung to their mothers. Men looked at one another, shame gnawing at their silence. For the first time, doubt crept into Baudin's power. The crowd began to murmur, torn between fear and the flicker of hope Elias offered. Then a rider galloped into town, bloodied, wild-eyed. "They're coming," he gasped. "Tonight." The square fell silent. All eyes turned to Elias. For the first time, the outcast was no longer invisible. He was their last chance. Night fell heavy, darker than any before. In the church, candles flickered as a handful of townsfolk gathered around Elias. They were not soldiers, but farmers, blacksmiths, widows, and boys barely grown. Their hands trembled as they loaded rusty rifles and sharpened kitchen knives into weapons. Elias stood before them, weak but unbowed. "You've been lied to," he said. "Told you're too small, too weak, too broken. But tonight, Saint-Rivière has a choice: to live kneeling or die standing free." His words rolled to the church like fire, igniting something long buried in their hearts. One by one, voices rose in defiance. "We'll stand. We'll fight. For our children." Jean stepped forward last, her hand clutching the badge on Elias's chest. "For the sheriff we deserve," she said, her voice breaking. They knelt together, whispering prayers, some in French, some in English, all with the same plea: protection for the innocent, strength for the broken, courage for the condemned. Outside, the sound of hoofbeats thundered closer, shaking the earth itself. The candles flickered as fear clawed at them. Elias gripped his revolver, jaw set. "Then let's make our stand." And as the first shots rang out in the night, Saint-Rivière's fate was sealed. The first shots tore through Saint-Rivière like thunder. Windows shattered, horses screamed, and children cried as the bandits rode hard into the streets. Torches blazing. Flames licked at the rooftops, painting the night in blood and fire. Elias stood in the center of town, revolver steady despite the weakness in his legs. Around him, a ragged line of townsfolk raised their rifles and pitchforks. They were no army, but they were all the town had. The first wave hit hard. Bandits stormed the saloon, dragging men into the street. Elias fired, dropping 2 before they could draw their knives. "Hold the line," he roared, his voice cutting through the chaos. Farmers and blacksmiths rallied, pushing the raiders back step by step. From the shadows, Sheriff Baudin cowered, pistol drawn but never fired. His eyes darted to the flames, to the blood, and he whispered only to himself, "We're doomed. We're already dead." But above the screams and gunfire, Elias's defiance rang louder. For the first time, Saint-Rivière fought not as victims, but as a town with something worth saving. Still, the night was far from won. The bandits regrouped, fury burning in their eyes. They set the general store ablaze, smoke choking the streets. Women dragged buckets of water, coughing and sobbing, while children clutched each other in the church pews. Elias fought in the dust-choked square, every shot deliberate, every step measured. But his wounds slowed him and his vision blurred. When one raider lunged a knife, Elias barely parried, the blade grazing his ribs before he put the man down with a single shot. Beside him, Jean fought with rifle clutched tight, her hands trembling but her aim steady. She dropped one bandit after another, her face streaked with soot and tears. "For my children," she cried, the words fueling her fire. The townsfolk began to believe. Hope flickered in their eyes. But then a scream split the night. A boy fell, struck by a stray bullet. His mother collapsed over him, wailing, and panic surged again. Elias grabbed the boy's limp body, carrying him toward the church. His voice thundered over the chaos. "Don't you break now. If you give in, they'll slaughter every soul here." Blood pooled in the dust at his feet. And yet, the townsfolk rose again, rage fueling their fight. But the bandits' leader was not finished. Not yet. As dawn neared, the bandits pulled back, regrouping for one last strike. In the quiet between gunfire, Elias leaned against the church steps, breath ragged, body broken. He knew they would return stronger, and he had little left to give. It was then that Sheriff Baudin revealed his treachery. Slipping into the shadows, he carried a white cloth tied to a stick. He rode out toward the bandits' camp, his cowardice plain. "Spare me," he begged their leader, "and I'll give you the drifter. He's the one you want. Let me live, and Saint-Rivière will bow." The bandit chief laughed, a cruel sound that echoed through the canyons. "You think we want him? He's the only reason you still breathe. But bring him out, and maybe I'll let you watch while I burn your town." Baudin returned, pale and shaking, muttering lies to the people. "They'll spare us if we give them Elias." Gasps filled the square, fear gripping them again. Jean stepped forward, fury burning in her eyes. "And what then? When they take him, who will stand for us?" "You, Baudin." The sheriff faltered, shame etched into every line of his face. But Elias rose, revolver still in hand, his voice quiet but firm. "Let them come. I'll face them." The bandits came with the sun, their numbers fierce, their guns ready. They charged through the smoking ruins of Saint-Rivière, certain this would be the final blow. Elias stood at the center of the street, alone at first, his shadow long in the rising light. His revolver gleamed, his eyes burned, and his chest rose with the last of his strength. Behind him, the townsfolk gathered. Farmers, widows, children with stones in their fists. They stood not because they trusted him, but because he had given them something Baudin never could. Courage! The first shots rang. Elias answered with fire and fury, each bullet finding its mark. He moved like a man already half in the grave, fearless, relentless, unstoppable. The bandits faltered, shaken by the defiance of a man they thought broken. But then a bullet tore through his chest. He staggered, blood blooming across his shirt. Another shot struck his shoulder, spinning him back. Still, he lifted his revolver, teeth clenched, firing until the hammer clicked empty. As he fell to his knees, Jean rushed forward, screaming his name. The townsfolk surged with her, rage and grief exploding into battle. Elias collapsed in the dust, the ragged doll still clutched in his hand. With blood on his lips, he whispered, "Protect them to the last." And with that, the outcast's body hit the ground, while the fight roared on above him. The dust of Saint-Rivière was thick with smoke, blood, and the cries of the wounded. For a moment, time seemed to stop. Elias lay still in the street, his revolver silent, his chest unmoving. The bandits sneered, believing victory was already theirs. But then the townsfolk rose. Jean led the charge, her rifle steady, her voice a war cry. Blacksmith Durrett swung his hammer like thunder. Farmers raised their hunting guns, and children hurled stones with trembling fists. The grief of watching Elias fall turned to fire in their veins. The bandits faltered, one after another. They fell under the furious defense of a town that had finally found its courage. By sunrise, the survivors fled into the desert, leaving their dead scattered in the dust. The streets of Saint-Rivière were broken, but the people were unbroken. When silence finally settled, Jean knelt beside Elias's body. His hand still clutched the ragged doll, stained now with his blood. With trembling fingers, she closed his eyes. He was no outcast, she whispered, tears streaking her soot-covered face. He was our protector. The townsfolk gathered, heads bowed, their voices heavy with guilt and gratitude. Where once they had turned their backs on Elias, now they honored him as a man who gave his life so they could live. At sunset, they buried him on the hill overlooking Saint-Rivière, the sky burning red like the blood he shed. No fine marker marked his grave, only a simple cross of wood. But Jean placed a doll upon it, a symbol of the man who died carrying their hope in his hands. Years later, when travelers passed through Saint-Rivière, they heard whispers of a drifter who gave everything for a town that once despised him. The children of that town grew up knowing his name, and though Elias never lived to see it, his sacrifice carved courage into their hearts forever. Saint-Rivière would never again forget the outcast who became their guardian, and in the wind that swept across the plains, some swore they could still hear his final words, carried like a prayer. Protect them to the last.